Hello, students, and welcome to the first lecture on Napoleon for this week's class. I apologize for not being in class Wednesday morning. You might be able to tell I have a sore throat, and Wednesday morning was a little rough for my voice, but we drank my tea. We drank all the concoctions to get me here today, so I can give you the ever important lecture, part 1 on Napoleon. So if we're looking at the scale of how our class is going, we just finished the French Revolution. So we started in 1789, and now we are currently in 1794. So I know we're a couple weeks into the class, and we've already only covered a couple years, but we start picking up pace here in these next couple classes. So it's really important to pay attention for these next couple classes. So, and don't worry, my voice is a little off. I sound a little nasally, I know, but got my water here. We are good to go. So, we will jump right in. The beauty of doing this online here today is, yes, I know it's off schedule, so you have to take some time out of your day to listen to this lecture, but it will be up on YouTube. And the beauty of YouTube is you can, if you think Mr. Tibbetts talks too quickly, you can slow it down. Or if you think Mr. Tibbetts talks too fast, or switch that around. If you think Mr. Tibbetts talks too fast, you can slow it down. If you think Mr. Tibbetts talks too slowly, you can speed it up. I give you free range to do that as long as you're taking good notes and pausing when you need to. If I talk too quickly and you need to stop and take notes of what I'm saying, please do. This is important stuff, and like I said before, any of this is free game on the midterm, which is coming up. I don't know exactly when it's coming off the top of my head, but I will let you know soon. It's coming up in about a month or so. So, let's dive right in. But first, let's recap the French Revolution so we can think about how this impacted Napoleon and his rise to power, which we'll be talking about today. So, the French Revolution, let's remember what happened real quick. First off, the key things that I want you all to remember that definitely or maybe will be on the midterm and the final is the 3 estates. Can we name the 3 estates real quick? And this lecture will be probably quicker than 100 or than an hour, just simply because I can't talk to you back and forth and such, so it will be probably a little quicker, but bear with me here. So, we learned about the 3 estates, that is the first estate, the second estate, and the third estate. First estate being the clergy, second estate being the nobility, and third estate being everybody else. We learned about the major causes of the revolution, which I don't have to go over because I've read all of your creative writing assignments, and you seemed like you all have that down pretty well. The calling of the Estates General, who called the Estates General, and why did it fail? The tennis court oath, how did the tennis court oath come about, and what assembly was created at the tennis court oath? That is the National Assembly. These are all things you should have in your notes. The storming of the Bastille, things about that. Not necessarily when it happened, but what was the storming of the Bastille? Why did it happen? What were the results of the storming of the Bastille? King Louis, did he support the revolution? King Louis XVI, did he support the revolution? Was he kind of supporting the revolution? Was he faking supporting the revolution? And then his eventual fleeing. It's called the Flight to Varennes. So remember the Flight to Varennes, and Varennes is spelled Vereen. And then after that, we looked at the war between France and Austria during the French Revolution. Why did France declare war on Austria? You should know that as well. The civil constitution of the clergy and kind of the revolution's attack on the Catholic Church. Why did they push back against the Catholic Church? And the answer for that is They pushed back against the monarchy and everything the monarchy stood for, and one of the things the monarchy stood for was the Catholic Church as being the religion of France at the time. They pushed back against it. The civil constitution of the clergy, what was it? It was an oath that all priests had to take loyalty to the revolution. You read that last week. The September massacres. What happened to the September massacres? If you recall with me, they stormed the prisons and held mock trials for everyone and killed over 1,600 prisoners because they were afraid of who? The Prussians. They were afraid of the Prussians coming into Austria and disbanding the revolution, or coming into Paris and disbanding the revolution. So, the conscription law is another thing you should remember. The conscription law is, we talked about the War in the Vendée, which I know a lot of you know about. Kind of the law that had a lot of people up in arms in the rural parts of France because they disagreed with the revolution, and the conscription law meant that every region of France, it's kind of like the states in America, every region of France had to send a certain amount of people to fight the war against the Prussians and the Austrians, and a lot of people in France didn't like that, so they rose up against the revolution. That was due to this conscription laws, and the result of that was the Reign of Terror, held by Robespierre, who was in charge he was basically in charge of the guillotine, and the Reign of Terror was trying to find enemies of the revolution within the France and outside of France, and put them to a swift end, as he puts it. So yes, and then once Robespierre falls and gets a little chop from the National Razor, gets his neck shaved, as we say. Then came in a less radical form of government, a more conservative form of government, that is the Directory. And that is where we left off last week. Let me get a drink of water. So the Directory. Also, real quick, if you're thinking, Mr. Tibbetts, why are you so dressed up? You're wearing a tie, which this is one of my favorite ties. If you're wondering why I'm wearing a tie, I love you all, but it's not because of you all. I just got back from work, so I have to wear a shirt and tie to work, so that's why. Nice try. You guys are amazing, but that's not the reason why. Anyway, I digress. Let's get into the new stuff this week. Make sure you have your pens and papers out, and we'll get going on this. So, this week we are talking about Napoleon's rise to power. So first, before we look at Napoleon's rise to power, however, we have to look at the government at the time. This is post Robespierre. The new government is the Directory. Now, the Directory came into power by killing a lot of the radicals like Robespierre, and designed a new constitution that was designed to make power be limited so that it never went into the hands of one man solely, like Robespierre. Now, we're learning about Napoleon, so I think we can assume, yeah, that didn't work very well. No, did it? So that was kind of their goal, was to create it so that no one man would gain power. However, the Directory was not very popular among the people, so they looked for someone to take over. Some people tried to put Louis XVII on the throne, the cousin of Louis XVI, but that failed. But that's a story for another time. So that's kind of the backdrop that we're looking at when Napoleon enters the scene. So Napoleon, let's go through his backstory real quick. So Napoleon's backstory. He was born in Corsica. So if you know Corsica, it's a small island off the coast in between Italy and France. So France is right here, Italy's right here, Corsica is right here. It's just a little island right here. He was born on Corsica in 1769, right after Corsica So Corsica declared independence from Italy, and then Italy was like, okay, well, we don't want you, but we can still sell you to France. So France, do you want this island? And France was like, sure. And so France bought the island of Corsica, and Corsicans weren't too happy about that. And so they didn't really like France coming into Corsica and claiming it as their own, but they didn't really have any choice because Corsica is this small island. And so there was a divide among the people of whether you liked the French coming into Corsica or you didn't like the French. So Napoleon was born in 1769 and Corsica became French in 1768, if I'm not mistaken. So just a year afterwards. So Napoleon grew up with this Corsican background and he really despised the French because of it. But his father, who was Corsican, actually loved the French and would trade with the French. And Napoleon had a very bad relationship with his father because he thought that his father was a traitor to Corsican independence. And so he got in many arguments with his father, got in verbal and physical arguments with his father. But he loved his mother. His mother was the main disciplinarian of the family, but he kind of respected his mother for disciplining him. He talks about in his journal one time when he remembers as a kid his mother spanking him and him leaving not crying but having more respect for his mother than before, which is an interesting thing for a 9-year-old to think about. But that's Napoleon. So he had a good relationship with his mother, bad relationship with his father. But they had enough money to send him to France for military school. So they sent him to France, and he got bullied a ton for his Corsican accent, for the fact that he was kind of antisocial, and on average, he got into at least one fight a day on average in elementary school. I mean, France's version of elementary school. But he loved reading. He loved reading about the great conquerors throughout history. And eventually he graduated. He wasn't the brightest child, but he eventually graduated at the age of 16 and became a second lieutenant in an artillery regiment. And the thing about Napoleon was he had tons of ambition. But the problem, however, was he had all this ambition, but there was a certain social hierarchy that was in France at the time. So remember, this is before the French Revolution. So before the French Revolution, we kind of mentioned that positions of power in government and the army was not given out based on skill like it is today. So if you're the best at something, you're probably going to rise the ranks and then soon become higher in command. However, that wasn't really the case back then. It was more based on wealth and your last name, so your status. So if John Smith over here had a wealthy father who was a noble, and this random Napoleon Bonaparte, who was way smarter than him, didn't really come from anything, then John Smith would still get the promotion simply because his family. And so Napoleon was kind of stuck in the second lieutenant role and couldn't really rise the ranks even though he wanted to. And he was stuck there for the rest of his time. The rest of his life. And it's too bad that nothing changed. It's too bad that nothing came around and shifted the entire social hierarchy of France. Wait, Mr. Tibbets, wasn't there something that came around that changed the whole social hierarchy of France? Oh my gosh, student, what's that called? That's called the French Revolution. Exactly. So the French Revolution came out, perfect time for Napoleon. So Napoleon saw the revolution as a way for him to get ahead. He didn't really care for the mobs, but he used it to rise himself in the ranks. So eventually he got promoted, and he put down a British invasion in Toulon, which is in southern France, and he got promoted to brigadier general, which going from lieutenant to general is a big thing. And then he put down a royalist uprising in Paris. So royalists were the people who wanted to get the king back on the throne, so like the Vendée, stuff like that. He put down a royalist uprising in Paris and then got promoted again to major general, thanks to the revolution. Let me take a drink of water real quick. See, still a little sick. So, things are looking pretty good for him. He's now Major General, which is pretty big and pretty high up. How else can you gain glory? How about another war, right? So, we get to the War of the First Coalition. So, France was spreading revolutionary ideas to other countries like Prussia and Austria and Britain, and they didn't really like that. And so we talked about this last class, how France declared war on the other countries before they did in order to prepare themselves for their own war. So that's called the War of the First Coalition. So the war is going on while the French Revolution is going on, and Napoleon is part of it. Now, Napoleon, one thing about him was he was an amazing leader, and we'll go through a couple aspects of Napoleon that made him an amazing leader. But one of the things was that he commanded respect. He was amazing at speeches. He was a great rhetorician. He was great with words. So he commanded respect in that sense, and he got his troops to be motivated. So 1796, right towards the end of the revolution itself, the war is still going on, and so France attempted a three-pronged attack on Austria to kick Austria out of the war. So there was two giant armies up in the north. So if I wish I had a map here, and if I was in class, I'd show you a map. But let's say this is Europe right here, right? So you got France right here, Austria's right here. They send two giant armies up north to go attack Austria from up top, and they sent a little army with Napoleon down south, kind of as a diversion. The problem was the two armies at the top got stopped by Austrian advances, and they couldn't go any farther. However, Napoleon and his army, they were low on food, they weren't paid, but he boosted their spirits and gained their respect with speeches, and he brought them through Italy, and then made them kind of the main show of that war. And then, so he fought the Austrians head on in the Battle of Lodi between Austria and France. He was in charge, and he gained respect because so generals usually sat back in the war, but he was up at the front. He was manning the cannons himself, getting covered in mud and everything like that, gaining the respect of all his soldiers as well. And he won the battle, and then moved south through Austria to Vienna and single-handedly kicked Austria out of the war. And he plundered as he went, which helped the soldiers as well because they were underpaid, and so they got to take the booty as well. So he was hailed as a hero because of this. And so when he got back to France after he single-handedly basically defeated Austria, he went back to France and he was hailed as a hero. However, the Directory were afraid of him getting too much power and too much popularity, so they sent him to Egypt in 1798. He went to Egypt for a little bit. He did some archaeology. If you look at the Great Pyramid of Giza today, and this could be a fun fact for the day, if you look at the Great Pyramid of Giza, the top of it is no longer there. That is because, unfortunately, to history, Napoleon used the pyramids as cannon practice for his army. So that's why the top of the Pyramid of Giza is no longer there. Fun fact for you. But he did some archaeology. He was down there, and eventually his plan was to keep Egypt for France. However, Nelson, the British general, destroyed his fleet in 1799, I believe. And so he abandoned his men, actually, in Egypt and went back to France. And when he got back to France, he was a very skilled propagandist. So he published his own paper, actually, and began spreading his name a little bit and showing his escapades in Egypt as something probably a little better than they were, and portraying him as some great hero. And so he started gaining even more popularity, and against a government who was not very popular in the Directory. And so he was then approached while he was in Paris after he came back. He was approached by a man named Emmanuel Seyss, who wanted to throw a coup against the widely unpopular government, and he wanted Napoleon to help him. So a coup is kind of an overthrow of the government, a non-violent overthrow of the government. His plan was really simple. He was going to trap the government in one place and then force them to voluntarily give up their power. Kind of like if you're wrestling with somebody and you pin them down on the ground, you get them in an armbar or something like that, and then you're just waiting for them to tap out. He's just waiting for them to eventually give up their power. And so Napoleon obviously agreed. He thought this was the greatest idea because it got him to more power. So he said yes. And so they told the Directory that they were in danger of a radical Jacobin group. And so they brought them to a palace outside of Paris where they would be safe. However, once they were in this palace, all the Directory, Napoleon's troops surrounded the palace and then entered the palace and wouldn't let them leave until they decided to hand over their power. And so they got them to sign a new consulate. So they wouldn't give all their power to one man, and not many people wanted that either. And so they agreed upon a three-pronged government instead, which was Emmanuel Seyss was one of them. Napoleon was the second consulate, and Pierre Roger Ducos was the third. However, Napoleon basically rewrote the consulate to make him essentially a dictator, so he had most of the power. So Napoleon is essentially a dictator at this point. So the War of the Second Coalition then begins in 1799. So Europe again is seeing France as a problem, and so they decide to attack France again. The biggest difference in this one was that Russia now joined the Second Coalition. Russia was kind of a powerhouse. They were big, they were strong, nobody really knew much about them, and so France got crushed right away as this was all happening. But then, as they were in the middle of this Second War of the Coalition, Napoleon took over. And another thing about Napoleon that made him a great general was the element of surprise. So he made a surprise attack in Milan that made Austria sue for peace. And once they saw how quickly he could move, the rest of the coalition quickly disbanded because they realized that he could separate his armies into small groups and surprise attack them at will. And so eventually the Second Coalition quickly ended, just as quickly as it started. So another victory for Napoleon. So then you might be wondering, so if Napoleon's the dictator, France, the revolution started because of the fact that they were in such deep economic debt, right? Mr. Tippett, you haven't talked about that at all. Well, what are some things? Napoleon was not just a good general, he was also amazing at improving the economy in France as well, something that the French Revolution tried and failed to do, and the monarchs tried and failed to do over and over again. So what did he do? He improved taxation by making a national bank. This is important, so write these down. Some of the things he did. He improved taxation by making he made a national bank. Then he made a legal code, which is still used in France today, called the Napoleonic Code, which made taxation more even among everyone. He got rid of corrupt governmental officials, which is very easy to do when you are not a corrupt governmental official yourself. We saw that in America not too long ago. He got rid of bad roads. but he also slid back in a couple things. So um, he well, so he reformed education. Um, so now it wasn't based off of solely your nobility. It was based off of your how smart you were, and how easily you could rise to the ranks. But he also slid back on a couple things. He slid back on women's rights a little bit, which is something he's digged for a lot in the modern world. So the French Revolution actually gave quite a few rights to women, but he pushed back against those and gave more rights to men, where women kind of became owned by their male counterparts a little more during this time. And then also he rolled back on a couple more things. He slid back on the revolution's attack against the Catholic Church, and reinstated the Catholic Church as the religion, of the national religion, which you read about today, or which you read about this week for a class, and you took a quiz on. There was more regulations, but with that. And then he also did one major economic thing as well that Napoleon is very well known for, is that he sold a ton of land to America, and really, really paid off a lot of France's debt with it. You might know it as the Louisiana Purchase. And he sold that to, I think it was 6 cents for an acre, I believe it was, which at the time was a lot. Nowadays, that's laughable. But he sold all of his land, basically all of his land in America, to pay off the national debt at the time, which got France out of a lot of their economic struggles. So, he sounds like a pretty nice dude, right? He's bringing France back. He's reinstating religion. He's building roads. He's doing all those cool things. Well, don't get tricked by him, because he didn't really believe in religion. He kind of had a Marxist view of religion, in the fact that he saw religion. He believed that it was good for religion because he thought it was a way from keeping the poor from eating the rich, is what he said. So he brought back religion because it was basically, in his mind, a way to distract the poor from worrying about politics and having an excuse for their poverty and, sacrifice and stuff like that, and giving up their suffering for a greater good and stuff like that. So that's why he thought religion, especially Catholicism, was really important. So then he's a dictator, basically. But how does he become emperor? So maybe you don't know this about Napoleon. He did officially become an emperor. He is actually, I don't know, but he might be the last ever emperor in the world. I'll have to look that up. Somebody look that up and let me know. But yes, I became emperor. So after a couple of failed assassination attempts, he decided, okay, I need to really solidify my place so nobody can try to take the throne from me. So he held a totally not rigged election where he polled everyone in France, and apparently 99% of the population voted that they wanted him to become an emperor, which, no, that's not true, but totally not rigged at all, right? But the person who has the largest stick kind of makes the rules. He had the largest stick. So he crowned himself emperor. So many of you probably know this story about him, but he was crowned emperor and he had invited the Pope. So generally when a king was crowned, the Pope would then set the crown on the king. However, he invited the Pope, Pope Pius VII at the time. However, when the Pope went to grab the crown to crown the emperor, he took it out of the Pope's hands and crowned himself, kind of as to show the people that the Pope did not give him the power, he gave himself this power. So, the other countries did not like Napoleon. They had just lost 2 wars to Napoleon. And so, Britain was planning another war against him. So Napoleon wanted to attack Britain. Britain wanted to attack Napoleon. The problem with these two countries, and this is really important to know for just general military history, is kind of a rule of thumb is Britain owned the sea and France ruled the land. So Britain had the best navy, France had the best army. And so Britain, instead of fighting France on the land, just gave money to other countries to fight the war for them, essentially. And so those countries were Sweden, Austria, and Russia. So this leads to another aspect of Napoleon that made him such a good leader. Spoiler alert, he won this war as well. If you hear Napoleonic Wars, chances are Napoleon won it. There was 4 Napoleonic Wars. We'll get to them. We're on the 3rd right now. So an aspect of Napoleon that made him so good before, so we talked about, so the 4 aspects that made him so good, and this will be most likely on your midterm. I haven't made it yet, but all these 4 will most likely be on your midterm. Things that made Napoleon such a great general. 1, he commanded the respect of his people. 2, the element of surprise. 3, speed. So the 3rd coalition was all about speed. So Napoleon made smaller armies that lived off the land instead of bringing food and supply chains for them, which made they could go quicker. And he broke them up into smaller categories so they could move at a rapid pace and surround larger armies and then pick them off little by little. And so quickly he knocked Austria out of the war simply by marching around them, and they saw how many people were around them and they gave up. And then there's a famous story of a battle where the speed of which he showed up to attack Russia, tricked Russia into marching their people onto a frozen lake after Napoleon, and which Napoleon shot cannons through the ice and broke the ice, and all of the Russian soldiers drowned in it. So Austria eventually surrendered. So this was the 3rd time that Austria had kind of declared war against France. And so Napoleon wasn't about to have it again. So when Austria surrendered, King Francis I of Austria was made to, he had to give a large sum of money, give away a lot of his land, and make a promise that he would never start a war against France again. And the land that he gave to France, Napoleon then gave to his relatives. So fast forward a little bit, a couple more years, and guess what? The Fourth Coalition starts again in 1806. Napoleon is still in charge. Austria is not in this one. It's Sweden and Russia who got beat, but they didn't get beat as bad as Austria did. So Austria stays out of it. Britain kind of stays out of it because they don't want to get involved on the land. So this is between France and Sweden, Russia, and there's a big new power involved. Now, we've talked about this before, and that was my drum roll. Prussia. So Prussia was well known for being the big brother of military escapades. They were fierce, they were ruthless, they had a long history of military success. And so Prussia's famous army allied with Sweden and Russia. And Prussia, however, was a little arrogant, and they sent Napoleon an ultimatum. So an ultimatum, if you don't know what that is, that's basically do this or else we'll destroy you. Or do this or else something bad will happen to you. And you don't really have to be a connoisseur of French military escapades to know that sending an ultimatum to Napoleon is probably not a great idea, especially without consulting the other allies. So they did that right away. They declared war on Napoleon and said, hey, if you don't move all of your troops out of Germany, then we will completely wipe you off the map. Prussia said that to France and said that to Napoleon. So what does Napoleon do? Using his speed, using his element of surprise, using his superior soldiers, who had just fought 3 wars, so they were well equipped and well knew exactly what they were doing. They wiped Prussia out in a month. A month. An entire country that is known for their military escapades got knocked out in a month. And so they crushed Prussia, and they camped in Prussia over that winter of 1806, and waited for the Russians to make a move. And they had a couple battles that winter, but not many, and so they decided to wait it out. Generally speaking, wars weren't fought in winter just because everyone lost. But they waited it out, and then once the war ended, or once the winter ended, they fought Russia again, beat them again in Berlin, and then when Sweden saw this, they surrendered again. So that is a fourth win for Napoleon. So that is where we'll leave off for today. Next week we'll talk about the fall of Napoleon. So this was the rise of Napoleon. We'll talk about the fall of Napoleon a little bit. So just recap real quick. We know Napoleon's backstory. If you don't, you can rewind, so I won't go over it all again. We know the War of the First Coalition. Who fought in the War of the First Coalition? Who won? Spoiler alert, France. We know how he gained popularity, how he rose the ranks. We know the War of the Second Coalition. How did Napoleon support the economy? What are some things he did that made him grow the economy in France at the time? What did he add? What did he roll back on? How did he become emperor? What are some things about how he became emperor? We have the War of the Third Coalition. Who is that against? What was the main deciding factor in that? Speed. And we have the War of the Fourth Coalition as well, in 1806. And the big one who joined that was Prussia. So, a lot of information in a small amount of time. But the beauty of all this is you can stop, you can rewind, you can pause, you can fast forward. So, I'm expecting good notes, because this is really important, and we'll go over this in class next week again, just real quick, before we get into the fall of Napoleon as well. So, with that being said, I feel like my voice is about to give out. So, I hope you all have a fantastic day. And watch this on your own time. And yes, I will see you all on Wednesday. Have a great night.